Good morning, Dan and Amy. So, Special Counsel Bob Mueller recommending no prison time for retired General Michael Flynn, Trump's fleeting NSA, suggesting that over the last year plus, some 19 interviews have provided, quote unquote, substantial assistance to the special counsel's investigation.
Yeah, and in that memo, they said Flynn's information helped Mueller build a criminal case. But against whom? We don't know because it was so heavily redacted.
So we've got, 5 pleas by Trump associates, and nothing has anything to do with any criminal conspiracy related to the 2016 election, 2016 campaign. As far as we know, this was the subject of a conversation that Tucker Carlson had with noted Russian studies professor Stephen F. Cohen, formerly of Princeton and NYU. And Cohen said this Russiagate investigation sans any evidence, which has yet to materialize, and the people who are promoting it, it's not just fact-free, it's actually dangerous to our national security, Stephen F. Cohen explains.
Because of these Russiagate allegations, clearly, that you've just discussed with Professor Dershowitz, that Trump feels not free to deal with Putin in terms of national security. Think back to John Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. I mean, that was the model of what we should never do again. But the lesson also is that President Kennedy was free to negotiate with the Kremlin leader to avoid nuclear war. That is not the case today. And that's why I think the danger of war with Russia, at least since the Cuban Missile Crisis, is greater in my lifetime, in history, than it's ever been, because of these Russiagate allegations, for which I've yet to see any authentic evidence. And we saw that last week. Trump either felt he could not or he lacked the resolve to go ahead and meet with Putin, even though this meeting is desperately needed. There's a new crisis every month with Russia.
And we got another one this morning, Wall Street Journal reporting that Putin is threatening an arms race as the U.S. prepares to exit that nuclear treaty that Russia continued to violate. Cohen saying those people, mainly Democrats, his fellow travelers once upon a time, are the responsible party here.
Russiagate allegations that Trump is somehow under the influence of the Kremlin, there's no evidence for it. So in my mind, whoever promotes this Russiagate allegations, and it's primarily Democrats, not only, but primarily the Democratic Party, is endangering our national security. Now, that's not a popular thing for a person such as myself, who used to live on the liberal reservation, to say. And people denounce me for saying it. But it's the real truth based on my 50 years of studying American-Russian relations. We're in a very dangerous situation, Tucker, and this has to stop, and has to stop very soon.
For an additional academic perspective on that issue, as well as the Bush 41 legacy and the Khashoggi matter, many topics cover with Art Sear, who's the Clausen Distinguished Professor at Carthage College, just north of us there in scenic Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
You can keep that one on the list for Peyton and Eli.
What's their mascot?
Not Division I, so I don't know. Art Sear, what's Carthage College's mascot?
We have Torchy, kind of a colorful cartoon character. The Carthage Flame is our symbol.
Carthage Flame.
And it's a kind of a scary-looking individual in a costume with a flame on top of his or her head instead of hair.
And the reports of you being
I'll send you a picture.
And
I'd love to see Torchy.
The reports of you being Torchy are unfounded, I presume.
Absolutely.
Okay, very good.
No, I don't think... if I applied, they'd reject me for sure.
All right.
I'm too old, too boring. I don't have enough hair.
Well, what do you think about Stephen F. Cohen's assessment of Russiagate and its national security implications?
Well, we're certainly I'm certainly in good company, and we are with someone as distinguished and senior as he is. The Cuban Missile Crisis, I remember very vividly. I was working in a supermarket in Los Angeles, a prime target area, after school. And when I showed up for work the day after President Kennedy's speech, the market was jammed. I mean, literally jammed with people. You could smell the fear. Nobody stole anything as far as we could tell, but they cleaned the store out completely. It was a very distinctive time in my life, and for the first time I really smelled collective fear. Good practice for later on in that turbulent decade.
Well,
But we don't, in my humble opinion, we don't face anything like that today. War by accident, the better analogy is World War I. We're at the 100th anniversary of the armistice. Just past it. War by accident, accidental miscalculation. It was close during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but given the nature of our leadership, as Professor Cohen described, and the uncertainties, especially in the Balkans and the Middle East, where the First World War began, I think that's a good analogy.
Well, and what specifically, though, about his suggestion that this is a time when Trump and Putin should be talking and not a time when Trump should feel for domestic political reasons like he can't make any overtures to Putin?
Well, I think that's a very good observation. There was more respect for authority in the early 60s, and we tended to defer more to presidential initiative. In that sense, I think he's spot on at the working level in terms of diplomats and military people, as well as scientists. There's a good deal of ongoing interchange with both Russia and China. There's obviously a lot of economic intercourse that was not characteristic of the Cold War period, especially the height of the Cold War in the 60s. And I do believe that things are more reassuring at certain levels. But he's very distinguished as well as very opinionated individual, and as are you guys. So I appreciate you having him on the show. It was instructive.
Thank you. President Trump, yes, is still sticking. I don't know if he's sticking by his story about Khashoggi's murder and who ordered the hit. But yesterday, the CIA director sat down with some senators who said, he'd be found guilty within 30 minutes if he's judged by his jury in a smoking saw instead of a smoking gun. How do you think President Trump should move forward with his relationship with the Crown Prince in the future?
I think he should. In this case, I think he should keep his distance from the Crown Prince. In this world, again, in contrast to earlier times in history, thanks to a pervasive media, including you good people, and the fact that the rule of law, believe it or not, is a good deal more widespread than any time before in the world's history, thanks in part to the growth of market economics. You can't behave like an imperious dictator and an imperious killer in ways that were possible in earlier times. The U.S., again, looking at things strategically and historically, we've just recently become, again, a major net exporter, and I mean major net exporter, not only of finished gasoline, but petroleum products generally, thanks significantly to fracking. And we're not as dependent on the Middle East, an unstable region, or any other part of the world in the way that we were from the early 1960s when we went into deficit in terms of petroleum trade and quite recently. So these are good times in terms of the resources of the U.S.
I wanted to get your perspective on Bush 41's legacy in the foreign policy arena. Richard Haas, who was in the National Security Council,
right,
and the Council on Foreign Relations as well. He wrote about Bush that he left the country and the world considerably better off than he found them, that on balance, because of his management of the end of the Cold War and repelling Saddam Hussein's invasion into Kuwait, that he left the world a safer place when he left. Is that your assessment?
Yes, indeed. I know Richard Haas very slightly, and I certainly follow his work, like a lot of other people, including General Scowcroft and certainly James Baker, consistently with people who worked for that president, women and men. I'm consistently impressed by how effective they are, and I believe he's spot on. Tom Clausen, who headed the World Bank during that period, served under Reagan, and our alum like to say that Ronald Reagan helped us feel better about ourselves and restored national self-confidence after some tough years. I believe that's true. Bush's extraordinary executive ability and his ability to prosecute collectively the very challenging Gulf War brilliantly, I think, is testament to the fact that his legacy is practical policy. Clausen was a very successful executive. He ran Bank of America twice, and in between ran the World Bank. And he was nominated by Carter. He was acquainted with Reagan as head of the Bank of America when Reagan was governor. But it was interesting to me. I was fortunate to become acquainted with Tom Clausen after I took the job here. The one he was really close to was George H.W. Bush. And Bush's executive ability, quite different from political talent, I think is a big part of his very positive legacy.
He is Art Sear. He is the Clausen, as in Tom Clausen, Distinguished Professor at Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Professor Sear, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, folks. It's an honor.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.